Hey guys, what is going on? It's me, Jake Tribbey, and I've got the Fantasy Points data wizard known as Chris Wecht here for a very special show. It's not spring football season, and it definitely isn't best ball season. So why would Chris and myself be doing a show together? Well, it's data season, and there's something a little different about the Fantasy Points data suite this week. Chris, how are you doing? And what's going on with the world's best football data tool?
I'm doing good. Yeah, we're trying to track down the person that turned the keys to make the tool free for this week. Has not been caught yet. Hopefully, by the end of week 5, we'll catch them because there is just too much free, awesome data out there right now, and it's dangerous.
It is. It absolutely is dangerous. I cannot believe we made the tool free. I was begging corporate to not do that, but they don't often listen to me. And yeah, this is one of many such cases. So yeah, Chris, let's go through this wonderful data tool. We're gonna answer some questions here today. Any questions people have? I know that there's quite a bit of stats, many of which aren't available anywhere else. So I'm sure people have plenty of questions about the data. So if you have a question, leave a comment and we'll do our best to get to everything over the course of the next hour or so. But yeah, Chris, where did you want to start with the data tool, and what did you want to show off first, sort of as a more basic overview, perhaps for somebody who hasn't used this yet?
Yeah, so I'll just give a general overview of all the current available tools that are there, and then we'll get into some more specific stuff, and then just kind of, yeah, like Jake said, try to answer your guys' questions as best we can. So when you load up the tool, you'll land on our dashboard here. This is where you can get to all the tools. You can also get to them using these tabs up at the top. So initially, we broke it down into sections based off of what kind of category they fall into. So under passing, we have 3 basic tables that are one for passing, rushing, receiving. Those are always free. That is not just a this week thing. That is a anytime thing. Those are updated with basic data about anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes after games end. You can go in there and see, like box score type stuff. Although the rushing stuff now has weighted opportunity, which is pretty cool to see right after a game ends. Targets, passing yards. There's also some of the filters are in there as well. And then those 3 tables are always free. And then we get into the much cooler advanced stuff. For passing, there's an advanced passing tool. It's just a next level basic table, but with all the advanced passing stats that we have. And many of the tools have an offense and defense view. So if you wanted to look at team defense advanced passing stats, that's what you would go to there. If you wanted to look at maybe a team that has had multiple QBs play, you just wanted to look at the whole offense and not just those QBs separately, that's what you could use that for. Passing depth of target shows some buckets for different depths of target down the field and how QBs perform in those. Under advanced rushing, like I said, basic rushing. Advanced rushing, again, is just a build on the basic rushing with advanced data. Bell cow report is Scott Barrett's baby. It is pretty much everything he uses to figure out how to tell you guys what running backs are actually getting a lot of usage and how they're being used in offenses. Highly recommend that. Under receiving, again, basic receiving. Advanced receiving is just the cooler version of that. Routes run is one of my personal favorites. Basically, we break down receivers' routes run by where they line up on the field, out wide, in the slot, and all that stuff. And you can kind of see how they perform in those alignments. Then we've got some more general stuff. So under offense, the running back wide receiver efficiency report would be the place to go for pretty much all your efficiency stats. Missed tackles forced per attempt, per touch, yards after contact, per attempt, per touch. Receivers, same thing, after the catch. Anything like an efficiency type stat, it's going to be in there. Snaps tool is also super useful. So it'll tell you all the snaps that we chart for guys on the field and where they, the scenarios they happen. If you want to know how many snaps did Devon Achane play versus Raheem Mostert by quarter, you could go look that up here. And then our newest tool, our O-line, D-line matchups is pretty cool. We make this super simple for you. It just shows you our top graded rushing matchups and top graded pass blocking matchups of the week. So we're really looking to identify where offensive and defensive lines match up here. So the rushing grades are based off of our adjusted yards before contact metric, and our passing grades are based on our pressure rate over expectation metric. And we just kind of compare them across league averages and the current week matchup. And then lastly, the fantasy points scored tool is, this will be great to use just to know how teams are scoring fantasy points with all of our filters. So if you wanted to know how many receiving points teams are giving up to slot players versus outside receivers, you would go to the defense version of this, filter for whichever one you want to look at, and you could look that up there. And these are just the first set of tools. There's going to be so much more coming across the year into next year, and we don't plan to stop here for sure.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most exciting parts about the data suite to me, is that there's so much more on deck. I know Alex asked a question in chat, wondering about, EPA potentially being added. Could you maybe hint at, what could be coming down the pipe potentially during, this season or in the next 6 or so months? Like, what is on the table for new tools in the data suite?
Yeah, so EPA specifically is definitely something we want to get in there. It's probably not going to happen in season this year, but it is definitely a priority to look at in the off season to get that in there. Some new stuff coming. We're working on a similar to our O-line, D-line matchups. We're looking at QB and wide receiver coverage matchups. So basically taking how teams or what coverage teams defenses play most often and comparing that to how receivers perform in those coverages, and just have a simple tool that'll give you basically grades of, this receiver does really well against these coverages that this defense plays a lot. He might be a sneaky start this week. Working on kind of like a coverage matrix tool, so you can kind of see an easy breakdown of how much man versus zone versus single high, two high safety teams are playing, all in one nice little table. Personnel matrix as well, percentage of times they're playing 11, 12, 13, 21 personnel, all broken down, trying to make more and more tools that are simpler for people to use.
Yeah, no, I think that's all fantastic stuff. So Chris, it doesn't look like we've had a ton of questions so far. So do you want to get into some of these tools and maybe talk through some of the stats that have drawn some of the most questions? Well, first we can tackle this one on the screen, which is, this guy's asking about where can he find information about how often a team plays man or zone, what kinds of coverages teams use, and in what situations they play certain defenses. What would be the best way to do that right now, Chris?
Yeah, so I was already kind of planning to get into the advanced receiving tool, and this is exactly, or I'd probably use advanced passing for the team version of this, but you could technically also do it in advanced receiving. So I would come into this advanced passing table and use the defense view. So basically, once you're in here, you can then use all of our filters to filter for man, zone, and so on. Once this loads up here.
Yeah, one of the things that I used this to look at was last year in 2022, I pulled Lamar Jackson's fantasy points per dropback against man coverage versus zone coverage, because they play the Steelers this week. The Steelers are a fairly man-heavy team. That was something that I just thought was interesting to look at. Wanted to throw that out there, but back to you, Chris.
Yeah, so over on the side tab here is where you'll find the filters. This one is where the advanced filters are, and then within there's our match filters. We're more of they're like a game level filter. So if you want to look home versus away, certain spreads, weather, anything like that at the game level, that's where you would go. And then our play splits get down to what happened on individual plays. And that's where this in particular filter would be. So I would come down here to defense, and then you'll see a coverage scheme filter. So you can do individual coverages, or you could do man or zone, which will just kind of pick them for you. So let's just look at man here. And then we're going to sort by dropbacks, and we're going to apply that. The other thing you could do the other more even in-depth way, you could use our splits, which will basically take the table and create multiple rows for every team for that coverage. So you would, down here, there's a coverage scheme. It won't, we did get some requests to add just a man versus zone one, which I think we're going to add, but right now it'll split in the individual coverages, which is still useful. But so anyway, over now we are filtered for what we did, man. So the Ravens play a lot of man, the Cowboys play a lot of man, the Patriots play a lot of man. You can also, if there's only certain stats you would want to see, this, I don't know what I would quite call this, the columns filter, you can come in here and basically, maybe you wanted to tweet out a screenshot of this or something. You can basically add and remove columns as you see fit. So let's say I just want to see dropbacks. I want to see how many yards per game they're giving up in that. Let's look at the passer rating they're giving up, and then we can do some advanced stuff like completion percentage over expectation, catchable ball rate, deep throw percentage. So now we can just see, all right, the Ravens play a lot of man. They're giving about 74 yards per game up in man, 79 passer rating. Let's see who's the worst in man so far. The Raiders, that's not entirely shocking. They don't play it a ton, though, because only 35 dropbacks compared to what we saw with the Ravens, 63. And let's see, then not shocking either, the 49ers are the best man defense team right now.
Yeah, so this is super helpful. And I think one of the coolest parts about all this, no matter how granular you get with these filters, your column selection, whatever, you hit download to Excel and you'll get an Excel sheet of exactly what is presented to you in, on the Fantasy Points data website in Excel. And then you can work with that in Excel and, manipulate the data however you want in Excel. Chris, we just got a question about filtering for red zone usage. This is something that I do a ton. If you wanted to swap over to the bell cow report, that's probably my favorite place to filter for red zone usage. But of course, you can do this anywhere in the Fantasy Points data suite. If you wanted to look at receivers, you could do this within advanced receiving as well. But in the bell cow report, all you need to do is go to play filters, and it's right there under yards to goal. Once this loads here for Chris, and then you can get even more granular, like than red zone usage. You could go inside the 10, you can go inside the 5, you could do inside the 1 if you want. You can customize it to get whatever you want. So yeah, that is how you get down to red zone usage. And I love doing this in the bell cow report, because not only does it tell you a player's snap and route share in the red zone, which is data that, at least to my knowledge, you really can't find anywhere else, but it will also tell you a player's expected fantasy points in the red zone, where we see that our boy Tony Pollard has been earning the best red zone usage of any running back this season. Pretty great stuff. And again, I mean, these are stats that you just absolutely cannot find anywhere else. Maybe there are other sites that have expected fantasy points, but they aren't letting you filter down to these kind of like crazy granular, stats. So yeah, Chris, hero catches and hero throws are something that I know we've gotten a lot of questions about. Do you want to kind of give like an overall explainer about hero throws, how those are charted, hero catches, how those are charted? What's the deal with those?
Yeah, so hero throws are probably the more common of the two. They are basically any kind of high leverage throw that the quarterback is making and doesn't necessarily have to complete it, because receivers can drop balls and whatnot. That shouldn't penalize the QB. It's typically going to be a pass that is, 15 to 20 plus yards down the field, your deep vertical go routes that he hits the receiver in stride. It can be a perfectly placed end zone throw. Game situation can matter a lot. I think we gave Sam Howell one this past week when he sent the game to overtime against the Eagles, his touchdown pass to Jahan Dotson. It was, they weren't super far from the end zone, but given the situation, I'm pretty sure he was on the run too, if I remember. The high leverage nature of it makes it a hero throw. Basically, anytime the QB is doing basically the maximum amount he could on the play. Hero catches is kind of similar, but for the receiver. The reason they're not as frequent is, receivers aren't really in control of where the ball goes. They're just in control of how the ball is caught. So your sideline toe taps, your jump balls in the end zone, like if a guy caught a Hail Mary to end the game where he's jumping up and catching it over a couple guys, stuff like that is your hero catches. So stuff where the receiver kind of has to go, he has to do an extraordinary thing to make the ball catchable.
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation. Hero throws and hero catches are a really cool stat. Maybe not the most relevant stat for fantasy football, but especially hero catches, something that you're not going to find anywhere else in any other data product. We got another question here asking about breaking wide receivers down into categories for things like stats versus man coverage, press coverage, zone coverage, etc. Chris, what's the best way to do that within the data tool?
So if you want to be more general and do the man versus zone, basically the same thing that we were looking at for defenses, you could do for um, players, and just go down here and do a coverage scheme. If we want to be more granular, and I could show you guys how the split feature works. So this coverage scheme split, because there's 10 plus different coverages, you do have to select a certain number of receivers, because otherwise the tool would just take a very long time to load if you tried to split on every receiver. So let's just take the top 100 guys that have run however many routes this year. We're going to select the top 100, and now you can click this, and we're going to apply that. So that's going to give us basically a row for every receiver against every possible coverage scheme. And then from there, we can look at cover 1 versus cover 2 versus what pretty much, any of the other coverage schemes.
Yeah. So like generally the way I'm looking at this for the purposes of my own writing, my own analysis, my own DFS lineups is I'm looking at specifically man versus zone. Chris, curious on your thoughts, but I don't think you generally see, as big as splits for wide receivers facing cover 3 versus cover 4 as you would versus a wider data set of man versus zone. What do you think is generally the best way to utilize this tool for fantasy football?
Yeah, I think man versus zone is definitely a good start. I do think there is certain receivers and certain offenses that will do things differently based off of the coverage that they see. So cover two and cover 3 are both zone defenses, but they're played very differently. Not going to get into the nitty gritty football side of things, but basically you only got one single high safety. The outside guys are basically playing like man coverage in cover 3 on the outside, whereas in cover 2, they're really in charge of the flats, and there's 2 deep safeties, whatnot. So that's something that only looking at zone could not tell you. So if I see a team that, like, we didn't really look at defenses yet, but if there's a defense, I know I've been looking at particularly Thursday night matchups, playing showdown and stuff where like being really granular matters. I like to look at, does this defense play a specific type of coverage that like more frequently than others? And then maybe, I think it was the Giants, or no, what was last night, or the Lions and the Packers. Sam Laporta really matched up well against whatever defense the Packers played a lot of, and he had a pretty good game. So it's not always going to tell you everything. Not every offenses do something different, but based on the coverage. But quarterbacks are reading the defense. They're trying to figure out what they think is going to happen after the snap. And they may have certain reads that lead to, all right, because it's cover 2, go look for this guy. So it definitely can matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great catch. Showdown DFS has gotten incredibly difficult, especially with the amount of simulation products out there. And I think when you look for what the biggest edges are remaining in like a single game daily fantasy contest, I think a lot of this coverage stuff is just not being accounted for in most projection sets. And if you're a showdown grinder, this is a tool that you're absolutely going to want to live in before Monday night, Thursday night, and Sunday night football, because it's just going to give you such a big edge in deciphering coverage matchups. Chris, we just got a question about sorting by downs, maybe looking at players who are most frequently targeted on third down, and whatnot. What's the best way to do that within the Fantasy Points data suite?
So there is a filter for that, or you could use a split. They both, if you either one, it just depends which one you may like to look at better. Since we're already looking at splits, we can just use the down split here. There's a lot of receivers, so it's going to take a minute to split on them. And then you could sort by raw total targets. You could sort by target percentage or target share, whatever one you want to look at. But yeah, you can do that.
Yeah, another way that we don't have to show this, but one of the other ways that I like using this tool is just looking at what wide receivers or tight ends see the most targets when their quarterback is pressured. That's like, something that I don't think there's any way to pull that anywhere else, no matter what tool you're paying for, unless you have something that isn't commercially available. And I think that's really helpful because when a team matches up against, say Dallas or San Francisco, we know their quarterback's going to be under pressure quite a bit. And so the real question is, when they need to get the ball out fast, who are they throwing to? So that's another thing that I really like to use. But so
let me show how to. So there's a couple ways you could sort this differently, and I think a lot of people might not know this just by looking. So you could sort by what I would probably do is sort by down, and when you hold down the shift key on your keyboard when you're using this, once it sorts, that'll let you sort by then another table. So right now it's sorted for, let's not look at fourth down. That's kind of boring. It's not enough of those. Just going to sort it the other way so that first down comes up first, and then if you hold down your shift key while you're in the tool, and then click on target share or whatever column, it'll then sort by the second column that you did, keeping this one. So we still have first down here, and now we're filtered on target share, and we can see Davante Adams is leading the league in target share on first down. Then Evans, Keenan Allen, Michael Pittman, T. Higgins above Jamar Chase is certainly a little interesting, but yeah, so that's a little sorting trick that you can do that I do quite frequently when I'm using the tool.
Yeah, I think that's great. And also for screenshots, if you hold down shift, you can drag columns over, right? So if you don't want to mess around with column filters, you can actually move the columns around to get what you want wherever you want, which is just so awesome. So Chris, I know that we've gotten a lot of questions, just generally speaking, about the differences between design throws, first read throws, threat rate, target share. I think that's something that's confusing to a lot of people because you don't see those stats referenced pretty much anywhere else. So yeah, Chris, could you kind of give like a more broad overview on some of our advanced receiving stats that I know we get a ton of questions about?
Yep. So, and again, something, if you ever want to just get back to what the table initially looked at, remove all your filters, you can always just hit the reset button up here, and that'll basically reload the table without having to reload the entire page. Let's see here. Let's take off some of these other columns so we can just kind of look at those specific things.
Yeah, so I know if you're looking for a very specific overview on first read targets, Ryan Heath wrote an incredible article this offseason giving, 2,000 words, everything you need to know about first read targets, why they matter for fantasy football. Today, we'll probably just be talking more, basic definitions and what the differences are between, design throws, first read throws, threat rate, target share. Again, because you don't see these at any other site, it's, I imagine, pretty easy to get confused by these stats. But Chris is here to help. So, Chris, want to take us through these?
Yeah, so first read is definitely the thing I think most people I've seen the most talked about thing on social media and whatnot. What that basically is anytime that the targeted receiver was on the QB's first read. So on a play, a QB, one guy is not the QB's first read. If that were the case, that would then be a designed read, which is it's kind of like a subset of a first read in a way that, it is the QB's first read, but it also was designed for him. So we include the design targets in this first read percentage because we feel that what people are trying to gain from this is really how often are teams looking to throw to the QB, this receiver first. So those are design numbers are included in this percentage, but I'm just pointing out that there is a difference between the two. The first read that isn't designed will have multiple guys. So if the QB is looking to his left, there'll be multiple receivers on that side of the field running routes that are all part of his first read. And then we kind of watch to see, does he look the other way? Does he go through his progressions? And then that would become his second read. We've got check downs as his like third read. And then lastly, there's what we call a scramble drill read, which is when, pressure gets in the pocket and he's just kind of got to make up a play at that point. And receivers just kind of try to create space for their QB to throw them the ball. That's kind of the last one. So first read is how often the team is looking to throw this way. This design percentage is the percentage of targets from design plays. So 8% of Davante Adams targets come on design plays. And then in the filters, if you wanted to filter for a specific type, you would go under passing targeted read and you could turn on and off certain ones. So if you wanted to see what a guy, so let's only look at designed throws. That'll then tell us the designed play. So when teams run design plays like screens, like jet pop passes, what is that guy's target share? How many of those guys, how many targets is that guy getting versus his teammates? Up here, I wonder, do you have a guess who it might be?
Uh,
Well, I already showed you now. Well,
I imagine Zay Flowers probably would have been my first guess, but it's hard to say since he popped out so fast.
yeah. Yeah, so Zay, which makes perfect sense. The Ravens are basically using him as an extension of the run game since they don't have running backs anymore. Garrett Wilson getting, that makes sense. They don't really have any other serious weapons, so they're going to make sure he gets the ball. Wan'Dale Robinson up there, and so this is only in the games he's played, so we don't penalize a guy for games that he wasn't in. So in the 2 games that he's played, he's getting a lot of those design plays. Yeah, so you could turn on and off and all of these if you wanted to see, how many, how often is a guy the second read? I know Ryan touched on that a lot in his article that second read targets are not nearly as valuable as first read targets, which makes sense. Teams should be prioritizing getting the ball to their best players in good spots. And then I didn't talk about threat rate yet. So what that is we look at how often is a guy targeted when he's on the field and the ball is not thrown away, batted, the QB scrambles, anything like that. So anytime that there is an aimed pass and that guy is on the field, how often is he targeted? So let me reset.
Yeah, and that's a stat that I know guys like Wan'Dale Robinson, Rashee Rice are popping in, but their route share seems to be getting in the way. Let's say once we're done with this conversation, I know that we've gotten a lot of questions about maybe looking through player game logs or whatever. One of the things that I love to do is splitting players by week, which effectively gives you a game log. That's maybe something we can look at a little later.
Yep. Yeah. So obviously, there's some of these guys they don't run like any routes, so their threat rate is super high. So that's what I would use a qualifier for, and then you can we could say they had to run at least. Let's go with 50. Let's go with 75, and you could put a custom number or a percentage of the biggest number. Apply that, and then so Devontae Adams is probably going to lead this, which makes perfect sense. Rashee Rice, like you said, he's way up here. So that might be an indication that if he does get on the field more, he's probably going to be being a little slow. He's probably going to be used a good amount in this offense should he get more playing time. So he actually got cut out because he hasn't run enough routes yet. So these are the guys that when they're on the field and the QB actually throws a pass to a target, these are the guys that are most often being targeted.
Yeah, this is super helpful stuff. I mean, you want to know when a guy's on the field, does the offense value getting him the ball? And it's important to remember targets are earned. They're not just handed out. And there's a reason why the best players in the NFL consistently earn the most targets. We got another great question, Chris. I really appreciate all the questions, guys. This is making the stream fly by. But where can we find splits on gap runs and zone runs? And which defenses do well against different types of runs? And which running backs do well in certain types of schemes, whether it's zone or man schemes? So, Chris, already got it pulled up. What's the deal here?
Yeah, so this is our advanced rushing table. If you scroll to the right here, you can see basically their stats broken out into zone and man concepts. You can sort by success rate. Again, I would probably have a filter on here because guys like Boston Scott and Mike Boone are going to pop up. But you can see, so look, DeAndre Swift is running a lot more. Like basically, no, the Eagles aren't running really any man, at least not with DeAndre Swift. We could see if that is a Swift thing using this search bar here, or if that's just an Eagles thing. If you type in the team name, it'll filter for just those players. So it does look like Kenny Gainwell does seem to be their preferred man runner, not by a ton, but Kenny Gainwell is basically running the same amount of man concepts as zone concepts. Swift is almost entirely zone. And then you could just flip to defense and all these same stats will be here and you could see how they do versus those. And then like everything, you can get as granular as you want under the rushing filters, under rush concepts. You can look at specific filters. We probably should add a one that just looks at sets man versus zone running for you. But if you wanted to look at just zone runs, you would just turn on inside zone, outside zone, and then you could see all the other fancy stats with those filters on.
Yeah, these are really great for getting, super, super granular. Like we said, I mean, pretty much everything in the suite enables you to get as specific or not specific as you want to. Chris, do you have anything else that you want to show off here? I mean, I imagine we may get some more questions, but yeah, any other like parts of the data suite that you want to show off? Any other frequently asked questions we've been getting? Yeah.
I think we did cover a lot of stuff. Let's why don't we try to do some matchup analysis for tomorrow night's game? See if there's anything, like as if we were gonna look up stuff to play Showdown, or decide if we should play Jahan Dotson this week, or Darnell Mooney, or what. You're probably starting DJ Moore and Terry McLaurin, but some of these other guys. Is there a particular spot you would start if you're just trying to look at a single matchup?
Yeah, so like a slate like tomorrow's, it's Washington and Chicago, if I'm not mistaken, which is an absolutely heinous game, but there's still plenty of money to be won. A slate like tomorrow's, I would generally start with looking at the quarterbacks, especially a rushing quarterback like Justin Fields. That's going to be your first major decision point. So like something that I like to do is look at a quarterback splits in man versus zone coverage. And generally speaking, and I would imagine field splits will reflect this, rushing quarterbacks do significantly better against teams that play a little more man coverage than zone, because when a team is playing man coverage, the defender's backs are turned to the quarterback. That opens up larger rushing lanes. It enables longer scrambles relative to zone coverage. So that's generally where I would start with something like that to see, is this a solid matchup for a guy like Justin Fields? I know that I have on one of my spreadsheets, I think I already have, maybe I don't. Well, we can check Washington's man zone splits a little later. But yeah, I do think this is like easily the most powerful tool you can have for Showdown, well beyond any of the simulation stuff or optimizers, which are, all great out there, but they don't enable you to see, extremely, extremely specific matchup data like the Fantasy Points data suite.
Yeah, so I turned on just the Commanders and Bears just because that's the specific matchup we're looking at, and then I filtered for just man right now. So Fields has definitely struggled passing against man, only a 59.5 passer rating. Not doing a ton in terms of scrambling against man defense so far this year, but I would imagine, so his fantasy points per dropback and per opportunity are definitely higher than Sam Howell's. Let's get rid of some stuff here. We don't need all this. Scrambles. And the fantasy point stuff, that'll work. And then let's look at zone. Yeah, so both guys significantly worse against zone in terms of fantasy points per dropback and opportunity.
Yeah, so then from there, it'd be a matter of just figuring out, what defenses do, what coverage schemes does each team play most of, teams, every NFL team runs zone at least 50% of the time, but some run zone almost every play, while others like, New England run man coverage on roughly half their plays as well. I know another thing that I'd love to look at ahead of these games, which we can get to a little bit later, is getting super granular in the bell cow report, especially with weekly usage and looking at trends within that. But that can wait a second while we see what coverages these teams play.
And let me just apply this. Go, and then let's look. We'll get real specific here to see if there's one thing that, because every once in a while there will be a defense that plays just a ton of one of the coverages a lot. So let me first do this. I'm going to use the little sort feature again. So the Bears are playing almost cover 2 and cover 3 about 50-50 with some other coverages sprinkled in, and so that's definitely a lot of zone. Cover 1 would be man. That's their third most popular. So I would expect Sam Howell not to see a ton of man tomorrow night. On the other side, the Commanders are playing a lot of cover 4, but then basically everything else is split. Cover 1 is, like I said, man. So Fields could see some man defense for sure.
Yeah, which is obviously great for his fantasy prospects. Like I noted, I know we got another question in the chat asking about our go-to stats for matchup analysis in the run game. I think this kind of feeds into what we were talking about with Washington and Chicago. Chris, do you have anywhere you specifically like to start for run game matchup analysis? Because for me, the first thing I generally like to look at is the offensive line, defensive line tool, which is brand new. And again, guys, all of these tools are free for this week. And after this week, only $50 to get data suite access really is an incredible deal. But yeah, this is the brand new offensive line, defensive line matchup tool that Chris is showing on the screen right now.
Yeah. So you can also come into this filter and you can kind of turn certain teams on and off because like using the search bar, you can only type in one team or player. But if you wanted to just look at these two specific teams, Commanders and Bears. So the run game looks definitely better for the Bears than the Commanders. Actually, let's look at the whole team because we could see like how that compares to the entire league. Yeah, so sorted by rush grade, the Bears are near the top. They're in the top 10 for us. So their O-line definitely matches our adjusted yards before contact per attempt is definitely up there for them. The Commanders did just play the Eagles, though. That might be, that's not the easiest matchup. So that could be pulling their number down a bit. And then the Commanders are here at 19th. So they're, middle of the pack from a running perspective tomorrow night, it looks like. Bears have actually been pretty good against the run. That could be because they're so easy to pass on, though. They've got the 5th lowest adjusted yards before contact per attempt. My guess is that is not so much about the Bears being good at stopping the run, but more so that teams know they can throw on the Bears, so they just don't get run on a ton.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great analysis. These tools enable us to get, like we've said many times, as granular, as specific as we want. But it's always important to incorporate context, especially with matchup stuff. I mean, there's only been 4 games so far, so I'm generally, if I pull something matchup related and it's particularly extreme, I'm almost always going back and looking at the opponents. A team played, what the final scores were, could game script or previous opponent have heavily influenced what happened. $50, Theo, is a steal. I 100% agree. I think Chris can speak to this, that our lead charter, Brett Whitefield, was not thrilled when Scott Barrett told him that the tool would be $50 this year. I do believe the price will be increasing next season, but we wanted to make this as available to everyone as we possibly could. We wanted every single person out there to be able to see the power that is fantasy points data. And guys, I mean, just from my own experience, I'm spending 50 hours a week writing about fantasy football, which is awesome and absurd and in and of itself. But I mean, this tool has cut down the amount of time I'm spending on writing by 15 or 20% just because I have to pull way fewer Excel sheets. It's all right there, all very simple. I can't thank Chris enough and the rest of the data team for making this tool because it saved me so much time. I know my girlfriend is thrilled about that. Yeah, Chris, is there anything else that you wanted to go over here before we get out of here? I think this has been a really great informative show.
Yeah, a lot of people look, they see this and they want to always try to say, oh, it's going to tell me the answers about the future. And while it certainly can, and there's things that it can help, what I like to tell people is that the more than anything, this data gives us insight into why something happened in a previous matchup. My favorite thing to do when I finish charting for 50 hours straight on Tuesday afternoons and Wednesday mornings is to see, I do an article every week of picking out like 5 of my favorite stats from that week. And it's usually looking for why things happened the way they did. And is that something did a team make a change? Speaking of tomorrow night's matchup, I noticed when I was charting the Bears this past week against the Broncos, they were using way more play action. At least it seemed like from watching it. And so then after we had all the data done and everything, I went and looked, and they basically doubled their play action rate in week 4 from weeks 1 through 3. And Fields' numbers are way better when using play action. He's, I think, 4th in fantasy points per dropback. He's like top 5 in passer rating. So maybe the Bears coaching staff is finally realizing, hey, maybe we should just do what this guy is good at, get him on the move, get him in space outside the pocket. Now for this, for Thursday night, I'm going to be saying, hey, there was a distinct change in coaching last week. Is that something now I can look to see in the future? Do they do it in this game? If they do, I'd feel pretty good about Fields kind of giving us the fantasy points he was giving us at the end of last year, the rest of this year, because now it would be a 2 games in a row where they've tried to use it. Now on the flip side, if they say that was just for that specific matchup and we're not going to do it again, I probably won't feel good about Fields moving forward. And just because I can then know the coaching staff doesn't seem to want to put him in good situations.
Yeah, I think, obviously super important stuff there from Chris. A final thing that I wanted to mention, and something that I use the tool for a ton, is say there's like a player injury, and I don't have a specific example come to mind because I don't think I did this today, but this is something I've done in many previous weeks. Say, Chris, a player, say one of the Bears running backs got hurt last week, midway through the third quarter. How would we see running back usage beyond, the point of that injury? And this is something that I think is like super powerful, super helpful, because it's tremendously difficult. Every data site out there basically just gives you game info, and it's tremendously difficult to sort even just by quarter, much less what we have available to us here. So yeah, Chris, how would you go about if you wanted to see usage, after some sort of an injury? Oh, Javonte Williams, that's a great example.
Yep. So yeah, like I said, you can just filter for specific quarter. In this case, let's do a split. And the other thing you can do where there's not even not an injury scenario that doing basically this exact thing would be useful is maybe it's a blowout. How much did Devon Achane play the past 2 weeks when the game was kind of in hand? You could see, split it by quarter, and then you could come in here and filter for the score differential. So you could say, I want to see when it's 10 minus plus or minus 10 points. How much does Achane play versus Mostert? I was actually looking at that this week because I think Mostert is still pretty much clearly the lead back there, despite Achane popping off. If you look at the numbers, he doesn't really play when the game is close. I know they've gotten out to quick leads in both games, but when the game was still close-ish, they seem to definitely prefer Mostert. So yeah, like you said, let's sort it by quarter this way, and then we'll do sort it by snaps. So we can clearly see in the first quarter, it was very much Javonte Williams. And then we get into the second quarter. Now we saw a lot of P. Ryan. I'm guessing that's the 2-minute drill and stuff like that. But still Javonte. And then third quarter, still Javonte, Samaje Perine. And then finally in the fourth quarter is where we see a lot of Perine. Javonte comes way down. And oh, wait a minute. I'm not on week 4. That would explain why I thought those numbers would be lower. So yeah, we totally missed that. Yeah, the week filter is up here, not with all the other filters. There's also previous seasons going back to 2021 so far. There we go. All right. So yeah, in quarter 4, it was all Samaje Perine. They used the fullback, it looks like, and then Jaleel McLaughlin. Javonte didn't play at all in the third quarter either. So yeah, it definitely looks like a pretty even split between Perine and McLaughlin. But didn't Perine get banged up too, or am I misremembering?
Not that
Maybe
I
not.
can recall. There may have been something there. I know McLaughlin's raw usage was better, but yeah, I think this has been a fantastic overview. Chris, is there anything else you want to cover before we get out of here?
You can also do basically that same thing. Like if quarter isn't good enough, like maybe you literally want to see the last half of the fourth quarter, we have these time elapsed and time remaining filters. So you can do it by game, by half, or by quarter. If you use half or quarter, you would just have to come up here and choose which half or which quarter you want to look at. So you can even get more, exactly how much time. If you knew what time Javonte Williams left the game, you could look at, okay, I want to see everything after that time, and then there you go.
Yeah, that's generally how I've been using this. Is I look up, try to figure out when a guy left the field, and then I'm just looking at positional usage after that point. So we've got a couple final questions rolling in here that we can answer before we get out of here. Joshua asked, is there a call limit or recommended delay between calls if I'm using Python or Selenium to crawl the site and pull different CSVs? This is a pretty technical question, Chris. What's
I don't believe you would be able to do that. I would have to check with our developers, but yeah, I don't, at least nobody else has brought that up yet. So I don't know for sure, but I would have to find out and get back to you on that one.
All right. And then we got a final question here from Theo about wide receiver separation stats against man coverage. This is something that I really enjoy looking at because, when a wide receiver is going against a corner man on man, how open he gets is generally a decent indicator, at least, of how skilled he is. So, Chris, what's your favorite way to look at this?
So we have been in discussions to start charting every single route that receivers run and how much separation they're getting on every single route. We are not doing that yet, but what you can do is where we were in the bell cow report. Let's go back to receiving. What you can do, get rid of this. Let me do this. Is come in here. So we do chart separation on anytime they get a target. So like we did earlier, we could turn on just man, and then we could put in, you can then look at specific separation. So let's look at open or wide open. What guys are leading in that category?
Could you let us know, what does open and wide open mean?
So that's a good question. So open is way more common than wide open. Wide open is basically only for when there's like a busted coverage on the play. The two corners don't communicate, and they let the receiver just go free. The corner falls over while he's running with the receiver, leaving the receiver wide open. That's what wide open is left for. Open is more so like they just beat the guy, and that's it. So yeah, that's the difference from there. There's also then up here. Step is like they have a step of separation, so there's in throwing window, but not necessarily like open. And then tight is tight coverage that can obviously still be a caught ball, but the defender is going to be all over him. And then closing is probably most commonly used for like zone defense. Think of when a guy is running like a hitch route and he sits in between two zones, and the defender is quickly closing on him, but he's not necessarily like in coverage on him. So we just kind of separate that out because otherwise that's not really like a guy beating somebody. He was just open in the zone, and now a defender is closing on him. He's got to be certainly, if the defender is, 10 steps away, that's not closing. But if he's getting closer to the receiver at the point of the catch, then we would call that closing. Let's turn on just see targets. Yeah, so Keenan Allen has the most open or wide open targets against man covers this year so far.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's surprised to see that. It is a little surprising to see Jake Ferguson all the way up there. I know his red zone usage has been pretty strong, but outside of that, he's disappointed a little bit. But I think those separation stats are super powerful. It's a pretty interesting way to try to separate receiver skill, especially as we get larger samples over the full season, seeing which guys are getting open the most against man coverage, because that is a real skill. And against zone too. I mean, there are it's mostly tight ends, but there are a lot of players who are pretty skilled at just sitting in zones and being able to get those open targets against zone coverage. So we really appreciate all the questions, guys. I think this has been an awesome stream. Chris, any final thoughts? Any last thing you want to cover before we get out of here?
Nope. If you do ever have any other questions, or if you ever have any feedback, that's definitely something we should point out. Or if you encounter any issues or just have any good feedback, things you'd like to see, whatever it is, you can always click this provide feedback button up here. you let us know if it's, a bug issue or feedback, or just telling us the tool is awesome. We love to hear it all. Our customer service team will get back to you pretty quickly on those things if you do have any issues. Any other like how to do something or whatnot, I'm pretty much always monitoring the Fantasy Points data suite in the Discord or chat channel in the Discord. So you can always drop questions in there, and I'll be happy to try to point you in the right direction of what you might be trying to get to.
Yeah, I know. Using that provide feedback button, I think is a really great tool. As somebody who's provided plenty of feedback, it's been really awesome to see like some of my suggestions or bug catches or whatever get implemented. We do have a very active team here at Fantasy Points on the data side of things. So if you have a great suggestion and it's something we can implement, it'll probably end up in here. So don't hesitate to leave feedback. And I think that just about does it for the show today. Chris, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for going over these awesome tools with me. I again, really appreciate all the questions in the chat. And I hope everyone enjoys their free week of the Fantasy Points data suite. I mean, if this doesn't convince you to spend $50 on the best data tool in the business, I don't know what will. So again, thank you so much, guys, for watching the Fantasy Points overview of the data suite free week. We really appreciate it.